you, relationships are critical in Washington. But how do you A, find out who the key players are, and B, figure out how to reach out to them? Well, I want to tell you about Leadership Connect. It's been an absolute lifesaver for us as we expand our operations and outreach here at Washington Tech. Leadership Connect, it's the digital service used by top federal contractors and government affairs leaders to contact decision makers and develop those strategic relationships. Visit leadershipconnect.io and join the community. I love it, and I'm 100% sure you will too. That's leadershipconnect.io. Try it now.
Shareholder advocacy, if well done, complements laws and regulations, and hopefully it'll take us to a better place.
Welcome to the Washington Tech Policy Podcast.
The latest tech law and policy news and brightest tech law and policy experts wherever you are.
So you can stay informed, on the move, in less time.
From Washington, D.C., it's the Washington Tech Policy Podcast.
With Joe Miller.
Joe Miller.
Amazon faces an employee walkout after it fires 3 employees for protesting against the company's working conditions. The ACLU sues the city of Baltimore because of a new aerial surveillance program, and Michael Connor is my guest. Hey everybody, Amazon fired 3 employees last week who were critical of working conditions at the online retail behemoth, which reached a market cap milestone of $1 trillion in January. The employees were fired for complaining about the company's coronavirus response, urging the company to increase cleaning at its facilities and joining public protests opposing the company's practices. Organizers are calling for a mass employee walkout on April 24th. Amazon founder and CEO Jeff Bezos' net worth currently stands at $139.4 billion. The U.S. unemployment rate is estimated at around 17%, the worst it's been since the 1930s. The nation's unemployment insurance system, which was set up to compensate those who have lost their jobs, can't seem to keep up with the number of new unemployment claims surpassing the 20 million mark. A major reason for the problem is that the agency relies on COBOL, an outdated programming language that few programmers seem to know. So those who are unemployed have yet to receive their weekly checks, which with the stimulus can be as high as $1,000 a week. The city of Baltimore has reportedly entered into a contract that will allow private phone companies to conduct aerial surveillance and search for evidence. The pilot program claims to be designed to investigate murders, non-fatal shooters, armed robberies, and carjackings. The ACLU is challenging the program on the Fourth Amendment's reasonable expectation of privacy guarantee and the First Amendment guarantee of freedom of association. The SAT and ACT college entrance exams announced last week that they'd be developing digital versions of the test to allow prospective students to take them from home. But the SAT's bosses at the College Board, namely its Executive Director and President David Coleman, say that it's unlikely the SAT would be conducted online. So over the past few years, many have questioned whether the SAT is even necessary, including Cornell, New York University, UT Austin, American University, and others, which have eliminated the requirement that students take the SAT as an admissions prerequisite. And many advocates point to the likelihood that administering the tests remotely would exacerbate current achievement gaps, since the quality of testing environments would vary significantly between low-income and high-income test takers. In any case, the June in-person SAT has been canceled. President Trump has been adamant that he wants to reopen the government by May 1st, but where's the data to back him up? The CDC has opened their data to the public, but much of it is weeks old and conflicts with other data being conducted by research institutions. You can read more in FedScoop. Finally, privacy concerns stemming from the use of mobility data to combat the novel coronavirus has opened up a passionate debate around the precedent policymakers are setting regarding the use of private data. Google and Apple are working together on technology intended to facilitate contact tracing, so infected individuals and everyone they encountered in person can be notified and told to stay home. But not only will this require over 100,000 employees to carry out, it also would rely on mobility data, including Bluetooth data. We've linked to an interview with Berkman Center Executive Director Urs Gasser, in which he explains some of the ways mobility data can be used to combat coronavirus and what the privacy implications are. You can find links to all of these stories in the show notes. Stay with us.
Washington, the inclusive voice of tech policy. Because America won't stand still for the same old insiders. Insiders. Washington, moving the needle.
My guest today is Michael Connor, Executive Director of Open Mic, which he helped launch following a distinguished career as a media executive, entrepreneur, and journalist. Michael is a former staff reporter for the Wall Street Journal and correspondent and senior producer for ABC News. His television work has received numerous awards, including 2 national Emmys, a Columbia-duPont Award, a Writers Guild Award, and a nomination for an Academy Award. Michael currently serves on the board of the Center for an Urban Future, a New York City-based think tank dedicated to highlighting the critical opportunities and challenges facing New York and other cities. He's a graduate of the College of the Holy Cross. Please welcome Michael Connor. Michael, welcome to the show.
Oh, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, tell us first, what is shareholder advocacy? I was interested when I saw that. And how is Open Mic using shareholder advocacy to advance civil rights in tech?
Shareholder advocacy leverages the power of stock ownership in publicly traded companies to promote more responsible policies and practices, especially, and there's 3 words here, on environmental, social, and governance issues. So ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues. And it really, the shareholder advocacy kind of is built on a much larger movement of socially responsible investing, ESG investing, impact investing. Various terms are used. And right now, over $3 trillion, that's nearly 1 out of every $8 invested in the United States, is in some form of ESG investing. And what shareholder advocates do is they engage with ESG investors to use their holdings in publicly held companies to bring about change. What Open Mic does, Open Mic is a nonprofit organization. We've been in business since 2007, so 13 years now. We're funded by some big foundations. We ourselves are not shareholders, but our mission is to foster greater corporate accountability in the tech and media sectors. So what we do is we work with investment firms that have anywhere from $2 to $20 billion in assets, or big state and municipal pension funds that sometimes have hundreds of billions of dollars in assets, and foundations and other investors. And we put together coalitions of investors to engage with companies in various forms. Sometimes that engagement is a friendly engagement, but more often than not, the companies resist some of these initiatives, and as a result, the process can get more contentious. We've been involved in a whole range of issues. We've been involved in net neutrality, privacy in general, data security, all the problems at the social media platforms, racial and gender diversity in the tech workforce, surveillance, and we've been engaged with, at one time or another, with almost all the big tech companies. So we've had campaigns that have focused on Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, Alphabet, all of the big ISPs, Comcast, AT&T, Verizon, and others. So that's essentially what we do. We're trying to use shares in companies and the investments that people have made in companies to press those companies for more responsible policies and practices.
So that can't be easy.
No, it's not easy at all. It involves a lot of hard work. What Open Mic does is, our job is to focus on the issues. So ESG investing and shareholder advocacy has been used very successfully in the environmental area, particularly on issues of climate change. So we're specializing in tech and media. So what we need to do is look ahead, look at the issues that are emerging, identify them and talk to the investors about them, and then understand those issues and research them really carefully so that we can then work with the investors and engage with the companies on them. And really the detail is important. And we also work with a whole range of advocacy groups and social justice groups who help inform our work, because our work needs to be based and we work very closely with people who are affected by these issues.
So you mentioned briefly about some of the opposition and tech companies not agreeing with you. Tell us about some of the conflicts you've been having there.
Well, it takes many forms. I'd like to think it was simple, but the probably the biggest opposition we get and some of the biggest problems we have is when companies just refuse to listen, and that's something I think that I know your program focuses on Washington, and regulators and legislators are used to hearing that from these companies as well. So many times companies are pretty adamant. They don't want to listen. But then on a more tactical level, there's a whole bunch of things that they can do to try to derail our shareholder proposals or shareholder resolutions. They will go to the securities and the shareholder proposal process is a fairly is a regulated one and is regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And a lot of times companies will ask the Securities and Exchange Commission for, in effect, permission not to present our proposals to shareholders. And that involves lawyers and involves arguments before the Securities and Exchange Commission trying to get the approvals for these things to move forward. And then we have to persuade a large number of investors to our cause. We have to persuade big institutional investors, companies like Fidelity and BlackRock and State Street, where many people have their mutual funds and investments, and we need to persuade those companies to vote for our proposals as well. So there's a whole public kind of campaigning that has to be undertaken, and we need to persuade some very influential people about the rightness of our cause. So it's not easy, but nothing's easy, and really the shareholder advocacy is one tool in the toolbox of trying to push companies for more responsible policies and practices. And what we're trying to do is to persuade them that this is good business and that long-term sustainable policies are better for them, for the companies, and they're better for shareholders, and they're better for the public at large.
And what are some of the major issues specifically that they objected to?
Companies, it will depend on the issue. Sometimes you will engage with a company and you'll raise an issue, and we had an engagement with Apple a few years ago where we raised some issues about privacy, and Apple said, let us come back to you in a couple of weeks. And they came back to us and they said, actually, you've made some good points. And they made some changes about their privacy, how they deal with privacy at the highest levels of the company, and that was great. Other times, though, companies will resist you. This year, in this current proxy season, we are engaged on a number of issues. We're engaged on issues largely surrounding surveillance at Amazon, and then we're dealing in a whole bunch with the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Google. We're engaged in a whole bunch of shareholder proposals that deal with civil rights and civil rights governance. So the companies, if they don't have to listen, oftentimes they don't want to listen, and then they don't. So our challenge is getting them to listen, getting them to the table.
So now, obviously, COVID-19, we've seen a lot of health officials ramp up in the use of surveillance technology to track this pandemic. And I'm concerned this will create a pretext for law enforcement and some of the surveillance issues you raised in the context of due process. What are some of the other civil rights violations you're anticipating that Open Mic has included in their shareholder proposals?
It's a very good question. And you're right in that the whole COVID-19, the pandemic has increased the number of contacts and inquiries that are involving surveillance of citizens. There's talk that the White House has been in touch with the various tech companies. And in some ways, some of that may not be bad because technology can help address many of the health issues involved with COVID-19. But, and it's a big but, on the other hand, the surveillance, what we call the surveillance economy, or what has been called surveillance capitalism, it's a term popularized by a scholar, Shoshana Zuboff, that has been in the works for some some time, and it's got, the government itself does not gather much of the data that people talk about. It is being gathered by private companies. It is being gathered by Facebook and Google and Twitter and the rest of these companies, who then in turn, one way or another, the government accesses it. So the question is, what are the rules and regulations involved in that? And for example, this year we have two proposals on the ballot at Amazon. One of them involves a technology called facial recognition, and Amazon has a product called Recognition, spelled with a K. And what we're asking the company there to do, and it's a pretty simple ask, is to investigate the civil and human rights risks posed by using or selling and marketing recognition, particularly selling it to government and law enforcement agencies in the United States, or selling it to governments, authoritarian governments in other countries. And then secondly, there's another second proposal which asks Amazon to consider how its customers are using various kinds of surveillance technologies. So as most people probably know, Amazon has a consumer product called Ring, which is a doorbell technology, and they combine that with another app called Neighbors. And again, what this is all about is surveillance. So we don't know exactly where it's all going, but what we're trying to do is get the companies to acknowledge that there are substantial risks, substantial legal, financial, reputational risks involved in how they're handling it. And this is particularly true of Amazon, which is one of the largest companies in the world and has a great obligation to consumers and consumer trust. And so we're simply trying to get them to talk about the risks involved in surveillance before they actually surveil millions and millions of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's a critical time and a perfect opportunity for bad actors to take advantage of the use of surveillance technology for good purposes, to go ahead and use that as a test case to do some not so great pursuits. So
you said it.
But in any case, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll find out more about open mic. Stay with us. Facebook, Michael, how do they figure into your work with shareholders? How does the increase in demand for Facebook while people are locked down, how has this affected your objectives? And are there any particular shareholder proposals we should know about which are specific for Facebook, Instagram, or really any other social network?
Yes, and yes. Look, Facebook has become arguably one of the most, if not the most influential media platform in the world. So it's important what they do and how they do it. And we have had shareholder proposals and have been engaged in battle with Facebook for, I think, 4 years now. And the COVID-19 situation highlights their importance and all the things that can go wrong. Particularly in the area of civil rights. And without getting into a whole lot of detail, but over the last several years, it's been shown, and civil rights groups in the United States and human rights groups throughout the world have talked about how Facebook has been used as a platform for disinformation, misinformation, and civil rights abuses, which is it's online harassment, it's racism, white supremacy on the platform. Facebook has tried to control many of those things, but the jury is still out. And in fact, Facebook has agreed to conduct a civil rights audit of what goes on its platform, but it's questionable just how effective that audit is not entirely complete, and whether Facebook will follow up to the degree that it should. So we have proposals on the ballots at Facebook, Twitter, and Alphabet this year, which are all kind of similar. But they address specific situations at each company. And what we're trying to do is we're asking the companies to take action to improve their civil rights expertise at the board level. What we're asking them is to assess the degree to which they have civil rights expertise, people who are competent and capable of addressing these issues at the highest levels of the company. And in fact, one proposal asks the company to nominate for membership on the board a person with civil and human rights expertise. Now that's not an unusual ask. If you're an oil company, you have people with expertise in oil on your board. If you are a banking company, you have people with expertise in finance. And since Facebook has such enormous reach throughout the world, we're asking that they have somebody on the board who has civil and human rights expertise.
Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, we think so. Yeah, and the unfortunate part of it is it's difficult for Facebook to listen. Now, the reality is that Mark Zuckerberg controls the company. He and insiders control about 60% of the company, of the shares, and they're not terribly responsive to requests by outsiders. And in fact, there's been enormous turmoil on the Facebook board over the course of the past year. 4 of their independent directors have left for one reason or another, reportedly, according to the Wall Street Journal, because of policy differences with Mark Zuckerberg. So whether we can persuade Facebook to be more responsible, we don't know, but we certainly keep trying.
So who left?
There's several directors, most recently Ken Chenault, who was former CEO of American Express, very prominent African-American businessman who left hasn't left. He has said he will not stand for re-election. And then there are 3 other directors as well. And so that there will be largely a brand new board that will be voted on when Facebook holds its annual meeting, which is likely to be toward the end of May.
And so Zuckerberg controls what, 51%?
He controls, yes, in the low 50s, changes. And then if you take Zuckerberg and other management people within the company, it comes to about 62%, I believe.
Unbelievable. You would think that our SEC laws would be designed to deal with that.
Yeah, and there was an example, this has happened with a lot of the tech companies where the insiders they've created 2 classes of stock, and the insiders, the founders, are granted a class of stock which gives them disproportionate voting rights. And the problem is that you've got a guy like Mark Zuckerberg, who is a young person, relatively inexperienced in business, who is not only the largest shareholder in the company, but he is also the chief executive of the company, and he's the chairman of the company. So he has the right to nominate his friends to the board. He sets a daily strategy as a CEO, and then as chairman of the board, he sets the broader course of action for the company. And this raises all sorts of issues about checks and balances and whether he's getting the proper information, the proper feedback, because it's really a one-man show. And when you think about the impact Facebook can have and does have and has had, particularly in the area of civil and human rights, the impact it has on people every day, even with this COVID-19 situation, it's been shown that there's a lot of disinformation being disseminated. It would call for more people with more experience, and more people with experience and wisdom on how to handle some of these situations.
And not to mention the fact that Mark Zuckerberg himself doesn't have a lot of civil rights and human rights experience.
Yeah, as far as I know, he doesn't have any. He was a young guy at Harvard, and he I don't want to say he lucked out, but he created this platform which took off. And so no, you would hope that he would be surrounding himself with people. And look, what Open Mic is saying in these shareholder proposals only echoes what a number of civil rights organizations have said in writing to him in letters. And those organizations include the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, Color of Change, and a whole bunch of other groups, Muslim advocates and others, have written to him with some very, very strong language, declaring that Facebook is not and has not addressing and has not addressed these very significant civil rights concerns. There's an civil rights audit that has been conducted, but those groups are questioning whether and how Facebook will implement the results of the civil rights audit. And so there's some very, very serious questions about how this will all how it'll all play out.
Yeah, you would think there are many prerequisites when it comes to the technical jobs. They have to have a certain skill set when it comes to PHP background or JavaScript and HTML and CSS, and that just scratches the surface because we have Tableau and all of these different platforms for data analytics, the skill sets that folks are required to have before they come into the company. But somehow civil rights and human rights at the very top level of the company, the policy making level and governance and compliance level of the company aren't required to have civil rights experience. It's just not seen as a skill set that someone should bring to the table.
Especially when you think of Facebook's reach, I think it now reaches 2 billion users a month on average. And the important thing, we think of it as oftentimes an American platform, but it is in, I think, over 100 countries. And even in each of those countries, there are different dialects and regional dialects and languages. And so the content that's on the Facebook platform is enormous volumes of content. And to be able to moderate that in some way, the whole content moderation issue is an enormously complex and difficult one. And it takes understanding how the world works, and it takes Zuckerberg has said that the company is using artificial intelligence to try to moderate content and the dissemination of racist content and disinformation, but it's been shown that that's not always successful. In fact, many times it's unsuccessful. Even in this COVID-19 situation, Consumer Reports recently did an experiment, and they found out how easy it was to actually post ads, take out ads on Facebook, which are targeted toward particular people, which advise that they drink bleach to get rid of COVID-19. Now, those ads never ran because Consumer Reports wisely chose not to run them. But even with all the complaints about Facebook and the platform, there are still many, many weaknesses in the whole system, and that ultimately is what needs to be addressed. Open Mic doesn't pretend that it can correct all these things, but what we're trying to do is ask the company to reduce the risk to the company, to the shareholders, to the public, and in the end make it a more successful and we think a more profitable company over the long term.
Well, thanks for the work that you do, and certainly addressing it at the shareholder level. I don't think is something that a lot of people think about. They usually think in terms of legislation and policy and lobbying. So thanks for addressing this space for us.
Well, thank you. No, that's look, that's exactly what I often say to people. Your audience focuses largely on laws and regulations, but there are other ways to affect corporate behavior, and we think shareholder advocacy is one of them. And so if people are interested, we'd ask that they look at our website, which is openmic.org, OPENMIC.org, or follow us on Twitter, which is Open Mic Media, at Open Mic Media, and stay abreast of what we're doing in shareholder advocacy. And shareholder advocacy, if well done, complements laws and regulations, and hopefully it'll take us to a better place.
Michael O'Connor, Executive Director at Open Mic, a nonprofit organization that works to foster greater corporate accountability in the technology and media sectors. Michael, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Joe.
That concludes episode 227 of the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. If you like what we do here, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment, head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and give it a review. Helps others know what they can expect from the show and really helps us out. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you back here next week. Take care.